Apparently I can, so.
Okay. All right. If we can actually have this, we'll call this meeting to order at 5:50 p.m. with apologies to anyone who wanted. Oh, this isn't live streaming, is it?
No,
So
it's not.
mind the apologies. Okay. Yeah, tech problems have slowed us down. We will come over here to the agenda, and the first thing is the approval of minutes from February 14th. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve those?
Well, it can only be Miss Schuster since.
Yeah, since Carol's not quite here yet.
I motion
I am
to
here
approve the
now.
She is.
Sorry, Carol. It was easier to join by computer.
Carol can second the motion.
We don't need a second in a committee.
We don't? Okay, then we're good to go.
Okay.
Okay. How about show of hands for approval? Everyone in
Since
favor?
I'm not on the committee,
Thank you. Yeah, you should not vote.
Yeah.
All right. I have received no public comment, and I have received no suggestions from board members of topics that they think would be good for us to have for a forum. So what do you all think?
So I had a meeting with Christina and she had a suggestion for a forum.
Okay.
And she had suggested us hosting a forum around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay. Might have to
Um,
pick one first.
yeah, I know. But I mean, it is a specific enough topic that, I think it's narrow, so it meets kind of the qualifications that, that the person who was recommending these suggested. But what I was thinking about, and I sort of kicked this idea around with Mr. Picaro and Mr. Downhour. And the problem is that most of the questions that we get around DEI are not questions for the board. They're questions for the people who are doing the curriculum equity audit and the people who administer the school climate surveys and the people who analyze the school climate surveys. And the more we talked about it and what Frank sort of eventually got to is he was like, if we could somehow start like their board forums include board members in it, but the panelists who are answering the questions, and actually Peter was sort of part of this when he sat on the board in Hamden, the people who need to sit on the panel have to be members of the school staff. They can't be board members.
Yeah, you would need administration there to answer the questions that.
Yeah. So, I was sort of roughly, and then I happened at the same time to have my, my CAPS racism and equity cohort, and Paul Freeman, who's the superintendent in Guilford, is part of this. And they are experiencing many of the same challenges we have in DEI. And he did do this. So he had kind of lessons learned. And so I sort of picked his brain and came up with some ideas off of, he actually has done two and had good suggestions. And then he was like, these are the things I definitely wouldn't do. So he did like the idea of a set of panelists, and as opposed to either just one of them, it was just him and his DEI person, and he said that didn't work. And so as far as panelists go, my thought would be, obviously it would be me. I think Mr. Picaro, because he's responsible or leading a lot of the curriculum revisions. Mr. Downhour, obviously. I would recommend probably our three principals. Or some combination of three principals, because they deal with school climate. Mr. Brandt, who would be able to deal with questions around equity for students with disabilities. And maybe Jill LaPlante, because she can deal with equity for access to classes and things like that.
Okay.
The more important part is, I think would be helpful to have the department chairs for the 2 content areas that are going through the curriculum equity audit as part of this, if they were willing to sit on it. And I think also maybe our ELA coach for the middle school, because she's sort of doing this work with the implementation of Reader's Workshop. So it's kind of becoming a big panel. So we would probably narrow it down to about 8 people. And then I think it would be reasonable to have one board member sit on the panel if there were questions directly about funding or policy or something like that. But then I was trying to think of, well, how does the board become involved in this? And, you know, and I was, so then Mr. Freeman's or Dr. Freeman's suggestion was, he really liked the idea of like having questions in advance, because it does, it helps stick to topic, right? So that way people can't just ask a random question about some library books that has nothing to do with DEI. So he says it helps then to have it stick to topic. And then in the course of Christina and I talking, she sort of liked the idea of people being able to submit questions anonymously, because she said people sometimes feel stupid or embarrassed or like they're saying the wrong thing when they ask questions around DEI. And so if they could submit them anonymously, then they would maybe feel more comfortable in asking them. And so then I was thinking, you know, because obviously DEI has some kind of political spectrum to it. And I don't want it to appear that we're just picking questions that we think are easy to answer for the panelists. So my thought was, if we had the questions submitted to a panel of 3 board members, those 3 board members could choose what questions to ask the panelists. So we could have like all of them in advance, but those 3 board members could throw out the questions, and the panelists would have no control over what questions were going to come to us. And so then I was thinking, okay, well, like, I don't want, and so, you know, and again, I was sort of, you know, Christina was representing one sort of side or perspective, and I mean, this is not going to come out very well, but I don't want her to all of a sudden be perceived as the face of the anti-DEI people in the community, just because she might get or ask questions that sort of probe about DEI, any more than I want somebody to take up the mantle of the champion of DEI in the community just because they ask sort of pro questions about DEI. So I was thinking, like, if there could be one person from each town who was representing like the question asking for the board, then you can ask whatever questions come to you from your constituents, you know, potentially within the town. So
lose anonymity that way.
I suppose you would, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
if you have your set of people, perhaps the communications committee, choosing questions, I feel like you would just be kind of like, what are the general topics? And then what is a well-expressed question, or putting together a, like, many questions came together on this topic.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. I can't imagine us trying to suppress a question that people have if it's not some wildly off the rails question.
I can't imagine us doing that either, but the perception that we may is the challenge. So I don't know. So I got pretty far until I started thinking about like who asked the question. Now I like sort of the idea of communications committee being the who asked the questions, because again, that's a logical extension of this work. You know, and I think if again, and we have good representation, so we have a person from Orange, theoretically, we have a person from Woodbridge, and we can have a person from Bethany sort of channeling those questions. So I think that could potentially work. so yeah, that was sort of where I got in my thinking of how we might be able to structure it. And, you know, and I mean, yeah, you talk about like, you know, taking on a big one for the start, but I don't mind talking about it because I think there's so much misunderstanding and misperception that exists out there. You know, on that I'm happy to try to answer questions for people.
I think it would be great to do it. BCS's experience was that when the open forums were initially started, there was a lot of pent up energy in the first couple. And so I feel pent up energy and the hardest topic, it might be a little tough, but I mean, at least you'd then be getting all this out in the open and addressing, I think, the biggest area of contention. So.
And again, I think the pent up energy can be somewhat contained if questions are submitted in advance and board members are merely functioning as moderators of those questions, as opposed to, like I said, people, you know, coming out and just sort of asking anything.
BCS runs its forum. Let me just real quick. BCS runs it. They let people who are in person ask questions, but the chair is also there taking texted or whatever questions that are coming in. So there is there is a moderator who is bringing in the questions and reading the questions or turning to a person. And that's pretty much all the board is doing.
So Carol left, so technically we don't have a quorum anymore.
Oh boy.
Will she leave saying, oh, she has to drop off?
Yeah. So I suppose we can record, hash out a few more details, but we can't actually do anything actionable on any of it. So.
And perhaps she can.
One question I had was, this is going to be done in May, right?
Yes.
If at all. And that will be after the first referendum, perhaps.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the urgency connected to the referendum or issues related to that is not really going to be addressed by this. And I was thinking about what Jen was saying about both the excitement and the pressure, to start with something just so that like everybody gets a feel for how this works before we move into this high pressure topic. Because the urgency is simply not there. Like, maybe we can do it later, but I would think that there's something informative and useful that we could talk about that is useful for the community before and this could be the second one. Because everybody, even the people have a sense of what the format is. Everybody feels like, there is less stress and we engage with the community. It's something where people want to learn without having strong opinions. And then let's move on to something else. That would be my suggestion.
I agree.
Yeah, if you're not committed to this topic, Jen, and you feel like it wouldn't be perceived as a dodge to do another topic, I feel like working out the kinks of moderation and question curation and so on a topic that people aren't as worked up about. I think it might help everyone involved feel less stressed and people feel more trust that there is a process that makes sense.
And again, Christina was the only one who came to me with an idea. It was a couple of weeks ago. And so I don't think, there's anything that would prevent us from selecting a different topic. I think of sort of the other comments or issues that come up. There's certainly the question around our academic programming. I'm not quite sure like where that goes, because I think we actually answer parents' questions about academic programming a lot through our registration nights and through our college preparation webinars and stuff like that the counseling departments do. So that is certainly a topic that's come up, but I'm not quite sure it would be interesting to see what questions come out of that.
It sounds to me like, academics is something that, like, if we are a school district, what are we doing for the curriculum around academics? Or, we had this very nice discussion about the school, the books that were being selected, etc. yesterday. It's like, especially given that if there is multiple books being selected, it would be a subtopic with some people interested in DEI would be interested, but it wouldn't be consumed entirely by DEI. So I think those could be like, again, I haven't also thought through deeply about what, I don't even have a good sense of what this particular thing is going to look like. But academics, like, what, so this goes also to the broader question, right? And maybe this is something that, Jen, you could be thinking about and, like, maybe come up with a solution. Think about, like, in your own mind, like, what do you think are the big, I hate to use the word vision, but, like, in the sense that I like the word about, like, 5-year goals or, like, something a little bit more longer term. What are some of your plans? Maybe that's a good way to kind of talk about some big picture issues, like, about how you think the school district might be going and, get a whole bunch of staff involved and so on. And it could be around academics, which I think could be something that unites people and brings together people. Everybody wants the best for the school district. Perhaps there is a way to frame something around that.
What about asking the community? I agree with Sid here that DEI may not be the best topic to begin with. Maybe come up with 3 or 5, and send a survey out and see what they would like. And I would do a short announcement as to a brief description under each topic, and let them know that, we are going to start something new and we're going to do forums, announce what it is and how it's going to be run, the duration, if it's going to be 1 hour, who's going to be on it, how it's going to be, we're going to do questions in advance, and then the frequency so that they get a sense that it's going to happen X number of times a year. And we're inviting community involvement.
Well, I mean, that's really kind of the point of both the board and the communications committee, right? Is that you are the conduit into the community. So it's through your conversations with your constituents that I was hoping that's why I put it out to board members. I was hoping that you had the responses for what the community is interested in. I can almost assure you that if I were to send out a survey, I will get about 56 responses. Because when we send,
but if you limit it, what I'm saying is you give them.
That's kind of what we get.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying leave it open-ended. I'm saying give 3.
I'm not saying it would be open-ended. I'm saying if I send a survey to parents, I get about 56 responses.
Oh, you're saying the response rate. Hey, well,
I think I think your conversations with, friends, neighbors, the things that you're hearing about, I mean, I know that there is that you guys have a lot of connections. And so kind of the feedback you're getting from them is, it's just as good as if we sent a survey out.
Okay. I understand.
Yeah,
I just thought maybe that would be easier.
It may be a good idea, like, maybe even just for brainstorming. We haven't really thought about this, right? So Donna, maybe when you're, Jenny, when you're talking to others, I could try to seek out, like, what might be topics that people would care about, just to just ask around, and maybe they'll come up with some topics, and then maybe we can bring it back to Jen.
I think that's the way to go. I think, and again, I think the survey has that sort of very formal, like if this is about a community, like a warm community conversation, then we have to start with conversations to try to figure out what we need to talk about. I think the survey already starts to, put it a little bit too much into that, like we're taking a step back box. And I think that was kind of our big goal, right? Was to sort of appear a little more accessible and responsive to questions that our community has. I mean, Jenny, when you used to attend the BCS ones, what were topics that came up?
They are open to anything. So
Yeah.
people will ask about grading. They will ask about scores on the SBACs. They will ask about, lunches, recess time, physical plant, people getting like the process of assigning new teachers for the year. They would ask questions about the COVID stuff. I mean, just whatever is on people's minds.
So, I mean, we can do a forum on grading. We could do a forum on, it's not really picking teachers, but we could talk about leveling. That might be a little hot button forum again, because that's the goal that I'm hoping to get to at some point. But I'm just sort of equating the things that you're sort of saying. We could definitely do a forum around, like I said, academic outcomes, if it was specific around test scores. I don't know. I think we would probably have to broaden it and sort of talk not just about SBAC, but about SAT, about AP. We could certainly do something like that. So, I'm thinking like even just some of the topics you might have heard through the open-ended BCS forum, we could probably pick and narrow down into a smaller format. And Donna, I think your idea of kind of coming up with, sort of an expectation around how often they happen, I think that's a great idea. I think we should test run one first to figure out how much manpower it takes to actually pull one off before I say, oh, we're going to have them 3 times a year or 6 times a year. I'm just learning, like, even from virtual keynotes, like 4 a year is enough. Anything more than that, and I don't have the manpower to do it. So I think we should probably do have a test run, figure it out, decide how it works, and then we'd have better information to decide frequency for next year.
That makes sense. Bethany does 2 a year, but with them open and people able to bring any topic to them, I think that people feel that that's plenty because they don't have to wait years to get the topic that they want.
How long are they, Jenny?
They are at most 2 hours.
Okay.
Depends on how much has been going on in the school. Like before COVID, I would see some that would just end early because people had no further questions.
I think I could see transitioning from the elementary school into the district. I had a lot of questions about that in August, and then also maybe transitioning from the middle school into the high school when you start talking about courses. I did get a lot of questions about that. And then, sort of, they didn't understand Link Crew. So I said, you'll get contacted by Link Crew. The freshmen will all have an orientation day. They get, everyone feels the same. It's kind of getting that message out to the anxious incoming freshmen. And I did get a lot of questions about that in August.
So Donna, in terms of, clarifying that, so you feel like, right now what is being offered by the school to the students is inadequate, and I was also wondering what the board's role in this aspect of it might be, so I'm just trying to understand a little bit more as to what.
It wasn't anything about being inadequate. I think it was, how do we what is the transition process, and who do they contact about the transition process? The counselors, they weren't sure who to call and who to contact about. And I think that some of this is just very simple, what freshmen expect and how it works. So it was nothing in any way negative. It was all just a little anxious from the parents who were first coming into the district from Beecher, in this case in Woodbridge. And then also transitioning from 8th grade to 9th grade, they weren't really sure, even though I know that they have the kids go and tour the school, but sometimes I think maybe things get lost in translation from children to adults and what to expect. So I had more questions from adults, but I also had questions from incoming freshmen, even asking my son, what do they expect? What is it like? And just kind of easing their anxieties. But everyone has a little bit of stress coming into a new situation.
Well, I think that this is actually one of the easy ones for people to do because this is something that we're doing. It would be easing into it. I was just thinking incrementally, would people see this as something that we are adding value, or would they see it as a duplication of something that they are already getting in some form, but maybe enhanced in some ways? Yeah. So
I mean, and I guess I'm getting more feedback that we need to do something different with our transition process, because they shouldn't have those types of questions. So it's good feedback,
Okay.
but I don't know that it's necessarily, again, sort of, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought part of the forum was to help to gain some inroad on some of what we think are public perceptions about the district at this point. And and transition hasn't really come up as an area per se of challenge. But again, again, thinking of an easy lob, that idea around sort of, the perception that somehow we are no longer attending to academics, that we are no longer a high focus, pressure-ridden academic school is I think is one that, again, for us is a lab. We know how much we do to try to move our students academically, but it's one that could potentially help sort of present a different narrative than the one that's being played out in.
I was thinking that since I started off with the academics, at least I wanted to kind of think through that a little bit more and see, and maybe there is a connection to what Donna is saying as well, in terms of being able to help student acclimatize, which is kind of another aspect to it. So I was thinking, why is this perception that the school is not doing well, right? What might be the case? And instead of trying to be defensive and responsive, right, kind of let's think about a little bit of a state of where we are, but also what are some major initiatives that we are doing in order to be able to, at least the survey suggested that there is a bunch of kids who are in the middle who feel like they're being left out, and there is a bunch of people at the top who are feeling like they're not being challenged. And of course, none of this is entirely, true. As anybody who teaches a diverse class knows that is not, that is always a challenge. But it would still be useful, and I don't think most people would know, what are the initiatives at the school to help various groups of people. And it actually does feel like something that might have been generated out of the community because we've had this topic, and it doesn't feel like, it's something that we are kind of bypassing the difficult questions, because this is something that did come up, and how does the school do well to create fit for the community? That sounds like an interesting topic. I think it would bring in a lot of different staff who are doing different things, including counseling and so on. So maybe, building on some of the stuff that Donna is saying, and what we might be thinking about, maybe some of those complaints that came from the community in that survey might be a basis to start.
Well, and it would be interesting to see what questions we would get around that area. The other possible one, and again, I'll give it to you to chew on since our meeting, because I forgot I don't have a paid account, so we only get 40 minutes of Zoom, which is why it says it will end in 10 minutes. The other one, so these sort of go together. But I know there have been perhaps misperceptions or calls for us to not do SEL instruction. And people don't quite understand what SEL is. And sort of simultaneous to that, they don't get what advisory and Spartan Seminar are doing. So we could have, and that again would be a fairly easy one for us to start with, but we could have question and answer sessions sort of around student mental health, social emotional learning, and seminar and advisories. And I imagine that one might also be a topic where we would get a number of questions that could get us started. And certainly I can put together a panel of people who can address that as well.
I like both. They're both rich and allow a lot of parent anxiety and concern to be addressed by people. And I feel like when we hear you, we, the board, are always reassured by the depth of what you're talking about. It's my gut reaction that the academics would be the place to start, because there has been this concern, not just with what SEL is, but that Amity is going downhill with academics. So I feel like that would be countering a negative worry that we have actively in the community. And I think it would have a lot of things that join into it, like Donna's parents might talk about transition concerns, or people might talk about leveling. You know, you might get all of these things sort of pulled in, and then you would be able to do a more targeted thing later on, while having, I hope, alleviated some anxiety about Amity and how its academics go. It feels like it's a topic that could go many places, and none of them should end up with people feeling brutalized in our first open forum.
Right. So if you did run something like in May, Jen and Jenny, and I was just piggybacking off of what Dr. Byers was saying about leveling. So I think some of this is confusing to people transitioning in, and then what their freshmen do and don't do, and just how their days are, the students' days are going to be organized. I think it's a nice, easy transition. It's a nice test run. And then, and if we do it in May, that's like perfect timing for everyone, for the students to be transitioning into the school, or from, whether it's from the middle school to the high school, or from the elementary districts into Amity district, so that they understand how it's organized, who their contacts are, so who to contact.
So again, we have to be careful, because we're not doing a presentation.
Right, not
Right?
doing a
We're
presentation.
opening it up and letting
Right.
people ask us questions.
Okay.
So we can keep it sort of narrow, and I don't know, I'll sort of work on a wording for it, but we open it up, and whatever questions we get, board members moderate those questions and we answer them.
Okay, well, I think thank you for the reminder, because that way they can ask what they want to know about transitioning, ask what they want to know about leveling and how the days are. I'm just thinking about the questions I received.
Right. So you're already answering them in a presentation, but what our responsibility is going to be, so really pushing and encouraging and soliciting the questions, so that we can have a forum that people actually get answers to their questions too.
Yes, fair enough.
So, but I think that's a fair topic to start with. So, but what I will do between now and our next meeting is I'll try to find a date that's going to work in May that doesn't conflict with everything else that happens in May. And B, I will I'll sort of work on like what a message might be that we could send to the community about the concept. And then from there, I think those are things that that the communications committee can review at the next meeting, that we could then share with the board.
So just to ask, since you reminded us about how many things happen in May. Is May the right time to start this?
Is May the right time?
If we don't do it in May, it won't get done this year. June is obvious. I mean, as soon as school's out, you don't get anybody. And I think pulling it off with April break, we lose an entire week in April. And honestly, our staff is, yes, we go full throttle, but until I can get everybody through AP exams and getting the seniors into SSLP, it's a lot busier at school. So May is really just more finding a clear date on a calendar, not so much that it's anything more than anything else on the staff.
Yeah, no, my question was, is this the time where people are really thinking about, are everybody just ready to get off on vacation?
Yeah.
Is May the time where you want to talk about academics? Everybody wants to get off academics.
Yeah, everybody just wants summer vacation.
That is true, and everyone's tends to be fairly done, but I think people who are interested in hearing from the school would still be at least interested in the idea that they could come and ask questions.
Yeah.
And I would love not to kick this can farther down the road. And I have forgotten my third point. I'm sorry. Go right ahead. Nope, do not remember.
And
So I'm
clearly
gonna
this
guess-
might also prompt ideas for other topics that might come, because if there were some deeper set of questions, maybe that will also prompt us to do more. Maybe SEL becomes a more prominent thing, and you might want to do something on its own.
Yeah.
In
I
addition,
would-
and so on.
I would love to have people from guidance there, because I think you might well get a question about how does mental health interact with academics? How are you handling these kids in this post-COVID thing? I would think that would be.
Yep.
You
Yeah,
may
no,
well-
I can put together a panel that sort of kind of reaches, like, again, thinking of Sudhir's point, the kids who struggle, the kids who need to really get pushed, all the kids in the middle. And then sort of, like the mental health impact on it. And so we can definitely put together a good panel that I think could answer most questions. And I'm
I
going
felt
to
like the data
get booted off of here in probably 2 minutes. So if there is anything else that we should cover.
I think if you talked to Kay or Colleen, you might have some sort of how to present the thing.
Okay, yeah, I was already thinking I would email Sue Carpenter tomorrow for whatever it is that gets sent out.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we will send you more ideas, or are we committed to the academics?
I think if we're committed to the academic, I mean, unless you get an idea from somebody, but I think if we start curating ideas, if people get them, then to Sudhir's point, we won't run out necessarily of possible topics.
Yeah, I mean, the SEL is a terrific topic.
But I think if we start with the academics, it addresses a topic that's come up, and so let's go ahead and address it.
Yeah, and we can make clear that we will address DEI just once we've got our feet firmly on the ground.
Yeah, I can follow up with Christina about that.